The 1930s were not a time of convenience, excess, or disposable living. They were a decade shaped by scarcity, uncertainty, and the quiet understanding that survival depended on preparation, concealment, and discipline. Storage was not about organization or aesthetics. It was about protecting food, tools, cash, and trade goods from theft, spoilage, and sudden loss. What many people miss today is that these storage methods were not accidental. They were deliberate systems refined by families who assumed hard times could get worse at any moment. What follows are the exact kinds of storage practices your grandparents relied on when survival, not comfort, was the priority. Food was stored where temperature and light could not betray it. In the 1930s, food storage was built around physics, not appliances. Root cellars, cold cupboards, and wall cavities were engineered to maintain stable temperatures year-round. Families understood that light, heat, and airflow could ruin months of preserved food. Potatoes, onions, apples, and carrots were stored in dark, ventilated wooden bins lined with straw or sand, often buried partially below ground level to prevent freezing and overheating. In urban homes without cellars, cupboards were built against north-facing walls, sometimes behind false panels, where outside temperatures kept food cool. Jars of rendered lard, preserved meat, and pickled vegetables were kept low to the floor, where temperatures stayed consistent. Today, this knowledge can be applied by using insulated storage boxes in basements, garages, or shaded exterior walls to store shelf-stable foods without relying entirely on electricity. Dry goods were hidden inside everyday furniture to prevent theft. The Great Depression brought hunger and desperation, and theft was a real concern even among neighbors. Families learned quickly that visible storage invited loss. Flour, sugar, rice, beans, and coffee were often stored inside hollowed furniture. Kitchen tables had false bottoms. Benches opened from underneath. Bed frames contained narrow compartments accessible only when lifted at a specific angle. This was not paranoia. It was practical defense. Thieves searched pantries and cupboards first. They did not dismantle furniture. Modern survivalists can replicate this by storing dry goods in sealed containers inside benches, storage beds, or custom-built furniture compartments. The principle remains the same. Concealment extends survivability. Cash and trade items were separated and stored in multiple locations. Your grandparents did not trust banks during the 1930s, and they were right not to. Cash was stored in small amounts across several hiding places. Coins were favored over bills and often sewn into clothing hems, stored in mason jars buried in gardens, or hidden inside stovepipe cavities. Jewelry, silverware, and barter goods were never stored together. The logic was simple. If one stash was found or lost, others remained. Today, this strategy translates directly to modern preparedness. Emergency cash, precious metals, and barter items should never be stored in one location. Distributing them across hidden, fire-resistant containers dramatically reduces total loss in emergencies. Walls and floors were used as long-term storage systems. Homes built before World War II often had unfinished walls, wide baseboards, and removable floor planks. Families used these architectural features intentionally. Grain sacks, cured meats wrapped in cloth, tools, and even firearms were slid between wall studs or under floorboards. These were not random hiding spots, but planned storage zones marked discreetly so the family could retrieve items quickly. This technique remains applicable today, especially in older homes or rural structures. Removable panels, crawl spaces, and attic joists can be adapted for secure, low-visibility storage of long-term supplies. The key lesson is that unused structural space is wasted survival potential. Glass jars were the backbone of preservation and concealment. Mason jars were not just for canning, they were the universal container of survival. Families stored grains, dried fruit, salt, sugar, nails, seeds, matches, and even gunpowder in sealed jars. These jars were buried, stacked behind false walls, or stored upside down in cool spaces to detect seal failure early. Seeds were often coated in ash or stored with dried bay leaves to keep those pesky insects away. Salt, well, it was kept in airtight jars because it was just about as valuable as the food itself when it came to preserving things. These days, folks use glass jars instead of plastic for long-term storage. That helps cut down on chemical breakdown, and you can check on your supplies just by looking without having to open them up. Back then, clothing storage wasn't just about keeping clothes tidy. It doubled as insulation, and an emergency supply too. Clothing was never, ever stored empty. Coats and blankets were layered up with hidden pockets, holding tools, ration cards, sewing kits, and sometimes even food. Winter clothing got packed away in trunks lined with newspaper and cedar, which kept pests out and helped keep the warmth in. Wool blankets were folded up with dried herbs, so they'd repel insects and stay useful for decades. For folks thinking about preparedness today, this really shows how clothing storage can also serve as emergency kits. If you sew a few small storage pockets into your coats or blankets, it lets you keep critical items close and protected, even if your main storage spots get compromised, Fuel and fire-starting materials were often hidden right in plain sight. Fire wasn't just about comfort. It meant warmth, cooking, and honestly, survival. Folks kept matches, kindling, lamp oil, and coal tucked away throughout the home, and always in small amounts. Matches were usually sealed up tight in jars with a bit of rice to soak up any moisture. Fat wood and resin-soaked rags? Well, those were stashed in tool sheds, behind staircases, even under porch steps. This kind of decentralized approach made sure that a single accident or theft wouldn't wipe out your ability to make fire. These days, the modern version is spreading out lighters, ferro rods, and fire starters in a bunch of different spots instead of just depending on one kit. Tools were kept right where the work actually happened. Instead of piling everything in one spot, families would store tools near wherever they were used. Knives could be found in kitchens, barns, and even bedrooms. Repair tools were sometimes hidden behind wall panels close to doors and windows. As for farming implements, those might be cached out in the fields, tucked under false hay piles, or buried just shallow enough to find when needed. This reduced retrieval time during emergencies and prevented total loss from theft or fire. Applying this today means storing essential tools near entry points, vehicles, and work areas rather than in one visible toolbox. Knowledge itself was treated as a stored resource. Instruction manuals, seed-saving notes, repair diagrams, and recipes were copied by hand and stored in oilcloth-wrapped bundles. Families did not assume access to libraries or experts. Information was preserved physically and kept dry and hidden. This practice is still relevant today, having printed manuals, maps, and written instructions stored in waterproof containers. Well, it makes sure that critical knowledge survives when the power goes out or, heck, when digital stuff just fails. These storage methods really worked because, honestly, they were just part of daily life. The strength of those 1930s storage systems wasn't about being complicated, but about being integrated. Storage was built right into the house, the furniture, the clothing, and, well, the everyday routine. Nothing really stood out. Nothing depended on technology. Everything just sort of assumed that loss could happen, and having some backup was always necessary. These days, modern survival planning often falls short, mostly because it separates preparedness into those big, obvious stockpiles. Your grandparents, though, they knew that true survival meant blending storage into normal life, so even during tough times, the essentials stayed protected and easy to get to. If this guide has given you some real, usable insight into how folks actually survived when systems failed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and share this with others who care about real history, not just surface-level nostalgia. This kind of knowledge truly matters, and once it's lost, well, it's mighty hard to get back.